Meeting is recorded, and we are launching a new initiative for developing CARB approval criteria for zero-emission switch locomotives. Our intent is to facilitate and accelerate deployment of robust and market-ready zero-emission switch locomotives by providing transparent performance metrics and approval criteria for CARB approval. And I think Robin is going to go through a presentation on the reason that we're doing this, what our intent is, and how this hopefully will be helpful for both zero-emission switch locomotive manufacturers and potential locomotive fleets who are interested in this technology. So with that, I'll pass it on to Robin so she can make her presentation.
All right, thanks, Joe. As he mentioned, I'm Robin Pritchard, and I'll be taking us through our topic this morning. So first, we'll start by going over the agenda for today's meeting. We'll start out with an overview of the concept being discussed today, and then we're going to proceed through the categories of potential approval criteria that we're considering. First, we'll go over performance metrics, followed by information available to the operator, warranty and recall, and durability and data reporting, followed by any other potential types of criteria. For each of these categories, following my introduction of the category, we will have a discussion. This will be an opportunity for you to ask questions or to make comments specific to that category of criteria. In these discussions, we want to try to stick to the specific topic. So please keep in mind that if you have overall questions or comments about the presentation, we'll have some time set aside before the end of today's meeting to address those more general types of questions and comments. If you prefer to submit questions or comments in the chat, please feel free to do so at any point. And then we'll bring those up and address those during the appropriate parts of the discussions. And after our discussions about approval criteria, we'll also briefly go over the next steps of this development process. So first, we'll start with an overview of the topic of approval criteria for zero-emission switcher locomotives. Switcher locomotives play a critical role in ensuring efficient movement of freight in California, but they're also a source of harmful emissions, such as oxides of nitrogen and particulate matter. And this especially affects communities that are adjacent to major rail yards. Accelerating the transition to zero-emission locomotive technologies is necessary to meet California's air quality, community health, and climate goals. To support the transition, CARB is proposing to develop basic approval criteria. The current concept is that these approval criteria will be issued as voluntary guidance, with the idea being that we want to promote transparency and consistency across manufacturers. The main goals of these approval criteria will be to support market penetration of zero-emission technology and to facilitate eligibility determinations for incentive funding programs. This voluntary guidance may provide the foundation for development of more detailed and comprehensive zero-emission locomotive approval criteria as the market matures. We envision that the approval criteria that we develop for zero-emission switcher locomotives will be guided by existing CARB programs that evaluate and approve zero-emission powertrains and other advanced technologies. However, this does not necessarily mean that requirements that exist in these programs will become requirements within the approval criteria for switchers. This table is being shown for illustrative purposes, and it won't necessarily follow that these are the specific criteria that will carry over directly. Existing programs that might help to guide this process include the Innovative Technology Regulation, ITR, which is applicable to on-road medium and heavy-duty hybrids, the Zero Emission Powertrain Certification Regulation, ZEP-CERT, which defines requirements for on-road heavy-duty zero-emission powertrains, and the Clean Off-Road Equipment Voucher Incentive Project, CORE, which includes eligibility criteria for funding of zero-emission off-road equipment. Each of these programs includes criteria related to performance as applicable to the target technologies for the program. One of our goals is for performance criteria to be measurable as much as possible using existing test methods or industry standards in cases where those apply, and not to be driving a need for manufacturers to create additional test procedures. These programs also include minimum requirements for warranty as shown, including in the case of the ITR, a requirement for reporting to CARB if a specific warranty claim threshold is met. For transparency, all of these programs have a requirement for third-party repairability and for some level of onboard diagnostics or telematics capability. These programs also address recalls with a specific threshold in the case of the ITR. Next, we'll go over several potential types of criteria and other information that may need to be provided in an approval process. We'll go into more detail about these in subsequent slides and in our discussions. The general categories of criteria we're considering could include a basic overview of the product and technology, performance metrics, information available to the operator, warranty and recall, and durability and data reporting. As part of an approval process, manufacturers may be expected to provide detailed information about the product. This could include the engineering principles of the technology, operating conditions and their implications on performance, identification of failure modes and their possible consequences, maintenance requirements, and possibly other types of information, such as the plan for battery end-of-life disposal. This is similar to the information that's required to be provided for other CARB verification and certification programs where staff evaluates new engines or emission reduction technologies. As stated previously, the primary intent of performance metrics is to facilitate transparency and consistency across manufacturers of zero-emission switchers, not to introduce minimum requirements for performance. An analogy that we've used to describe this is that it would be like the window sticker on a car, which is there for the purpose of informing customers of key metrics and other information to guide their purchasing decisions. This approval process is not intended to force manufacturers to come up with new test procedures. Performance metrics should be focused on information that is already being looked at and is accessible or measurable with existing methods, and that would be of significance to potential customers or operators. As much as possible, performance metrics should be consistent and repeatable across manufacturers, and ideally should be able to be demonstrated using industry standard test procedures. At the same time, the proposed metrics and requirements should help to determine that the technology is market ready and robust. So it's a balance. Although we don't want to create overly burdensome or unnecessary requirements, we also want to have criteria that ensure we're not approving something that's never been built. In brainstorming potential performance metrics, much of the discussion is centered around criteria specific to battery electric locomotives, that being the primary technology that's currently at the forefront of this category. Examples of metrics discussed so far include nameplate energy storage of the battery pack, usable capacity, as well as other metrics related to batteries, such as energy throughput, time to recharge between defined state of charge percentages, or discharge rate if it can be reported in a way that would be useful for comparison, given the differences in operating conditions and duty cycles. More general performance metrics that could also apply to other types of zero-emission technology could include maximum and nominal power, starting and continuous tractive effort, and estimated operating times under a full charge or tank. We may want to consider, are there basic repeatable in-use performance tests, for example, for continuous tractive effort, that we should require to verify a metric that is reported to us. We'd now like to open up the discussion on potential performance metrics. So right now, let's limit the scope of comments and questions to this topic. And if you have anything that falls outside of the particular topic of performance metrics, please keep in mind that there will be an opportunity later in this meeting to talk about that. And with that, I'll hand it over to Din.
Thank you, Robin. For the discussion portion, if you have a question, please either raise your hand or type your question in the chat. For those on the phone, there is no option to raise your hand, so I'll call on groups of phone numbers to allow you to ask your questions. We will start with questions from those who have raised their hands, then proceed to the chat questions, and then finally we'll go to the phone questions. When I call on you, I will enable your audio. Please unmute yourself and provide your name and affiliation before asking your question. Once you're done speaking, please remember to mute yourself again. Thank you. So with that, we'll start with questions for those who raised their hands. Right now, I don't see anybody that's raised their, oh wait, there is one. Okay, hold on a second. Okay, Richard Conti, I've enabled your audio. Please provide your name and affiliation before asking your question. Thank you.
Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
I'm Richard Conti, California Steel Site Maintenance Manager. I noticed in your presentation earlier, you talked about guaranteeing third-party maintenance or repairs.
So, so I think that, yeah, so that was in the table that I showed that it describes criteria from other CARB programs. So third-party repairability is included in those programs, and I just showed it there, you know, kind of for illustrative purposes. It does not necessarily follow that that would be something that would be part of the approval criteria that we're working on here. And, you know, the intent is for the criteria to make sense for switchers. And if it doesn't make sense to include that, then we won't.
My concern was only that we wouldn't be limited only to third-party repairs. We would be able to do our own repairs.
Right. Yeah. So it's not currently the intent, you know, for these criteria for us to, you know, to require third-party repairability. You know, it could be part of conversations for, you know, for other development processes, for criteria for other types of equipment, possibly, but it's not, you know, it's not something that's necessarily going to be included here. And if it doesn't make sense, then it won't be.
Thank you.
Okay, so the next person I have on the list is Scott Meyer. I will enable your audio. You may unmute yourself and begin your questions. Scott, you have to unmute yourself before we can hear you.
I'm sorry.
Sorry.
Yeah, I got it now.
No problem. Okay, thank you.
This is Scott Myers with OptiFuel Systems. We have contracts for both hydrogen electric and RNG locomotives right now are all zero emission. And one thing on the performance, but in all of these, you start out with the system requirements and going forward. When I look at their performance requirement metrics, they're all fine. But reality is, if you want to compare apples to apples, you really have to start out with a sort of a standardized duty cycle. And typically what I do is I use the EPA duty cycle for switches there. So you may want to think, if you're trying to come up with just a standardized way to compare how long it will operate with batteries or with hydrogen or with RNG on that, you probably need to come back to some proof, say you have to show some standard, a duty cycle that then people can look at their duty cycle and kind of compare to that in terms of how long they're at notch 8, how long they're idle, and all of that. So I would suggest that you look at a standardized way for a standardized duty cycle. Then you could compare apples to apples. That's it.
That makes sense. I don't. So the the intent right now for the development process that that we're undergoing for this initial phase of very basic approval criteria. I don't think our intent at this point is to develop a standard duty cycle or to try to impose that on any manufacturers or anything. To the extent that it does make sense, and obviously I think I stated this earlier, that as much as possible we want to have kind of apples to apples comparisons, or performance metrics for which it's possible to have to look at it in an apples to apples manner. It's going to be a balance of finding criteria that can somewhat easily be done for, and then maybe if there are criteria where that's not really possible to due to variances and types of operation and duty cycles and such, and also ways that that metrics are measured, that that we handle that in the most sensible manner, as far as not requiring a specific type of test process in order to demonstrate that metric. So this will all be part of the ongoing conversation, but it's definitely the type of input that we're looking for and that we're encouraging. So thanks.
I'm not suggesting that you have to test the locomotives. I'm simply saying, just like you calculate the emissions based upon a duty cycle, you can do the same thing on energy. And so if you want to try to understand how long you can operate, how many hours with this battery or with this amount of fuel, hydrogen or whatever, just you can calculate that, theoretically. And it's a pretty simple, it's very similar to what you do on your already emissions requirements based upon the NOx level. So it's a process that anybody could use to compare apples to apples, because you're really strictly just a duty cycle for the notches, and also looking at a standardized power level at each of the notches, and that's all you need then to calculate everything from batteries to hydrogen to RNG. Okay.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you for that input. We'll definitely be considering that.
Are there any more questions? I don't, right now I don't see any raised hands. Oh wait, there's one more. Okay. Oh wait, nope. Okay. Are there any more? Oh, okay. All right.
Okay. Somebody raised their hand. It was Michael Itzel from Cummins.
Yeah, and then he lowered his hand. So Michael, if you do have a question, please raise your hand again and I'll allow you to talk. Okay. All right. Michael Itzel, I enabled your audio. Please go ahead with your question. Unmute yourself and then begin speaking. Thank you.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yes.
And I have a question. Could you go back to the slide that showed the warranty? It was a table on it, please. Thank you.
So that would have been, so I will go back to that. So
I have a direct question too.
Yeah.
So
okay.
I didn't mean to cut you off.
No, I was just gonna mention that we were gonna get more into the warranty topic in kind of the next phase of our presentation here, but since I went back to the slide, so if you want to ask your question, please.
Okay, so I see warranty on years and miles. Is this referring to only non-internal combustion locomotives that would be hybrid, electric drive?
Right, and so the intent here is not to show what we're going to use for these criteria. It's just examples from other programs. So I may, if you if we go through the next part of the presentation, it may kind of address any question that you might have there.
So all I was going to say is, some of us that build locomotive products go on megawatt hours. That's the approved way.
Right.
This is very unusual to put a warranty on. Yours is fine, miles a little different with a generator, electric drive, different product.
Yeah. I do have the comment later on that you know, that I don't know if I call out megawatt hours, but energy usage would, you know, be a possible you know, criteria that we would use here instead of what's shown here. So so yeah, that makes sense.
Okay, I will hold for the next section. Thank you.
Right.
Hey, Robin, can I
Yes.
make a quick comment? Hi,
Sure.
This is Bonnie Soriano. I just want, I think Robin said it, but I just want to state again, those are other programs. Those are not necessarily what we're recommending. Those are just for comparison. And so some of them are, if you go back to that slide for just a minute, Robin.
Yeah.
I mean, those are different. Those aren't all just locomotive. Some of them are on-road, heavy duty, and off-road equipment. So those are just for comparison. Are not for comparison, but just as examples. And so I think that there might be some concern that those are what we're using. And so I just wanted to kind of clarify that a little bit more.
Well, Bonnie, I saw that you used the term existing CARB program, so duly noted, and I understand. Thank you.
Okay, great. I wasn't sure. I heard a couple of other comments, so I just want to make sure. So thank you. Thanks, Robin.
Thanks.
Okay, the next, oh, I'm sorry, I saw a raised hand. The person lowered their hand. Okay. Okay, if there's no more questions from those that, okay, sorry, that person raised their hands again. Okay, so I will allow, wait, I'm going to call on you. Sorry that I thought I didn't enable your audio. The name is, I apologize if I mispronounced your name, but Habdeb Makhaku. I apologize for the name pronunciation. You may, well, I think you're unmuted, so you can introduce yourself and begin asking your question.
You do need to unmute yourself.
We're not able to hear you. On my end, I see that you should be able to talk and you're unmuted. Okay. Maybe since we're having some audio issue, if you could maybe type in your question in the chat, and then we'll get to it when in the next portion. So we'll move on to the next person on that I see, Michael Even. I will enable your audio and you may introduce yourself and begin your question.
Hi, good morning / good afternoon. I'm a railroad and locomotive technology consultant from Illinois, formerly with several Class I railroads. The US EPA currently regulates locomotive emissions, and that includes requirements for what is considered to be the useful life of emissions critical components on locomotives. And of course, the federal emissions regulations for locomotives are all predicated on internal combustion engines. Has CARB spoken to the EPA in terms of establishing, you know, what you consider to be some useful metrics that may have to be met or should be met, requirements or recommendations versus what the US EPA may be doing in terms of future locomotive technology? Thank you.
So, so I just, you know, one thing I want to point out here is that we are very, very early in the process here. You know, this is actually, you know, having this meeting is one of our first steps, you know, in order to start to you know, to get input and feedback from stakeholders very early on. We have not engaged, you know, with the EPA to ask, you know, for specific input on types of metrics. That could certainly be something that we think about doing, and that, you know, that could happen. It hasn't happened yet.
And if I could just interject as well, this is not, as Robin mentioned earlier, this is not a regulatory proposal, and there are no sort of emission critical components here. This is zero emission equipment, and the intent here is really just to make sure that there's transparent, if we can develop sort of metrics, voluntary metrics that folks can rely upon and CARB can review and approve, this would help in terms of transparency for potential locomotive purchasers and for CARB programs, where right now there's not like a standardized review process for zero emission equipment. So we have actually reached out to EPA and let them know that we're beginning this process, and I don't know if they're participating in this meeting, but this is, as Robin said, we're in the early stages, but this is not, I don't know that this is necessarily related to the combustion and after treatment related sort of useful life elements of federal standards.
Okay, let's move on to the next person on the list is Peter Orowski. I'm going to enable your audio, Peter, and you may begin your question.
Yeah, I just want to follow up on Mike's question, because I hear that.
Oh, I'm sorry,
CARB...
Peter. Can you introduce yourself and your affiliation?
Hi, I'm Peter Orowski. I'm also a consultant, and I do current work with the Class 1 railroads and the Association of American Railroads. Thank you. And I just want to follow up. So if these are, I understand that they're voluntary metrics. What I'm trying to do is I'm trying to get a feel for what this is, but there seems to be use of the words like CARB can approve or we can require. And I just want to give an example. Is this something of a program, for example, that ARB would create and then use, for example, to approve research or grant funding or something like that? I'm trying to understand how this fits, and I'm just not quite getting it. So thanks.
So so the intent of this primarily is to create a approval criteria that could be used by incentive funding programs to help with their eligibility determinations, and then also some other reasons for having this type of process, to demonstrate transparency and consistency and market readiness of switcher locomotives from manufacturers, and to induce confidence, for potential customers or operators that that if CARB approval is something that's required by another program or for another purpose at some point, that the product that they're purchasing could already have that. So I don't know if Joe, if you have anything to add to that, but that's kind of the purpose of this process.
Yeah, the concept is sort of, as we move from combustion equipment to zero emission, and this stuff starts getting more commercialized and people apply for incentive funding, things like the Carl Moyer program funding, there's been challenges of getting it approved because, or having it be eligible. And so basically this is the sort of first step of, we would, conduct a public process, of which this is a part of, to try to identify what are sort of the most important performance metrics that are, very basic performance metrics like battery capacity or continuous tractive effort. And I think, we talked about duty cycles and, how long. I think we're probably going to shy away from things like, how long is it going to operate on a charge, just because there's so much variability. It's something that maybe in the future. Anyway, it's something worth talking about, but we realize the challenges of something like that. But the idea is to work with public interested stakeholders, come up with guidance approval criteria, including warranty, our initial thoughts is that CARB, if folks, we would have an application, online, folks would apply, report the data regarding the metrics that we come up with, and then CARB would issue an approval letter for this particular zero emission locomotive, has these particular, has X battery capacity and this discharge rate and this continuous tractive effort, or whatever those, it wouldn't be a long list. And then it's been CARB reviewed and CARB approved. And then it would be up to things like the CORE program or the Carl Moyer program to update their guidelines, or whatever the process is for them, to then say, oh, this is something that's been had some robust review and has some transparency to it and has some minimum warranty requirements, and so we're going to say it has to be CARB approved via this process to be eligible for Moyer. But that will be up to the other programs to basically go through their guideline revision or whatever it might be to then point to this. But the first step is to identify, what should be the CARB approval process that provides some assurance that this isn't, a locomotive made in someone's garage, but it's also not something that is, overly burdensome, and provides basic information that people can use to sort of compare and, understand what the expected performance is if they do purchase that locomotive.
And if I could follow up, that was really helpful. Thank you. So would it be an oversimplification to say that you looked at kind of what you've been thinking about on the ZEP-CERT program, where it started as voluntary and now it might not be, or moving into something, but you started sort of what you did for ZEP-CERT on a voluntary basis and see how that works for the locomotive sector?
That's right. And so, go ahead.
Well, go ahead, Joe, and then I'll follow it up.
Yeah, so ZEP-CERT is I believe it's still voluntary, but things like HVIP, other programs are now saying to get funding, it's mandatory for those programs to get incentive funding. So, so that's sort of the idea here is we're going to set up the bar, and I don't think we would want to set, a basic bar, and not something where we mandate minimum performance metrics, in terms of battery capacity or whatever. Just that it's transparent what those are, and I think we may have a minimum performance metric possibly around warranty, in part because some of those programs have like a, Moyer requires a 3-year useful life. And so, should we consider 3 years as a minimum warranty just to make sure that we're meeting the needs of those programs? But the idea is, yes, we would come up with something voluntary. You wouldn't need to go through it to sell a zero emission switcher, but it could be down the road. These incentive programs would require you actually, do get CARB approved to get incentive funding.
So does that
That
answer
is very
your question?
helpful. Thank you for that clarification.
Okay.
Okay, the next person with the raised hand is Michael Itzel. I will enable your audio. Please unmute yourself and begin your question.
Thank you. Mike Itzel from Cummins. Joe, I guess I'm a little confused. There's a lot of successful Carl Moyer programs. We've been beneficiaries of it for Tier 4 conversions. I guess this is a different topic then, right? I mean, are we going to relook at how Carl Moyer works? I guess say from my end successfully?
Well, I think there's been the Carl Moyer program has, and I don't want to speak too much for the Carl Moyer program team, but I believe for locomotives, it's a case-by-case process where districts have to sort of say, hey, there's no, for other categories, it's basically very clear, you've got CARB certification for this, retrofit device or verification. There's an approval process out there for these technologies. And with locomotives, for zero emission locomotives, there's not really that approval process existing. And so there's sort of a longer case-by-case approval, which has, if you've gotten funding, it worked for you. But I think the hope is that, if we work with interested stakeholders, we work the Carl Moyer program team, we could come up with something that they'll ultimately be able to rely on instead of the case-by-case, or maybe it remains case-by-case, but the main criteria of the case-by-case is that you're approved by us, and it sort of would speed things up. So yeah, zero emission switchers have gotten funded through Moyer. I know there's a case-by-case that just happened for 3 zero emission switchers in the South Coast that we sort of helped inform, the requirements for that. But rather than having it be every single time you've got to sort of figure out what you need to demonstrate and come up with criteria individually, this would be something that maybe would be more streamlined and simplify.
Okay, thanks, Joe.
Okay, we're going to go with one more question with raised hand, and then I think we'll move on to chat. The next person on the list is but Habdeb Mahaku. I will enable your audio. Please unmute yourself, introduce yourself, and then begin your question.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes. Yes.
Okay. I go by Buddy Mahaku, just in short. I work for Progress Rail Locomotive. Some things to consider when people were talking about warranty, useful life, emissions. First of all, this is considered as an electric locomotive, and electric locomotives are exempt from CFR 1033, or locomotive standards, if you will. Okay, so there is no EPA involvement for certification or anything at this stage in life, at this stage in the program. Okay, because if you go to EPA today and ask them, can you certify this locomotive? And they will tell you no, because it's not. It is clearly mentioned in the first chapter of the regulation 1033 applicability that electric locomotives are exempt. Okay. The second question was about warranty. So the warranty part of the regulations are twofold. One is the minimum useful life warranty, okay, which says that 1/3 of useful life, the locomotive, the certificate holder has to warrant the locomotive. Okay, that's how it works. The other part of the warranty is the useful life, that is compliance end. So as far as this product is concerned, as I can see it, you will be mainly concerned over 1/3 of useful life. Okay, useful life again is defined in 3 different parameters, not just megawatt hours. Okay, it's megawatt hours. Okay, it's got what you call miles. Okay, or the number of years. In general, for all products, EPA considered useful life as 10 years. 10 years or the megawatt hours or the miles, whichever comes first, and which is 1/3 of the useful life. So for a locomotive, which has got 10 years useful life, the warranty is only for 3 years, 3 months. Okay, so I think if you frame the warranty discussion in the current EPA regulatory context, that might work. And that is what perhaps we should consider when you're talking about warranty. With that, I hand over to you.
Right, in regards to I'll start with the warranty topic. So, you know, we're definitely, you know, the reason why we're having this process is, you know, is to get that kind of input and feedback. We haven't developed or established, you know, any specifics as far as, you know, warranty criteria that we plan to include in this approval process. So we'll definitely, you know, take your comments into consideration, and, you know, we can talk more too also at some later point too. And then going back to your initial comment, I just wanted to point out that, you know, we're not seeking to create a certification process here. You know, so I don't know if that addresses your comment or question there, but I just wanted to point that out.
No, the reason why I pointed that out is that locomotives are regulated in general. But if you are going to put an electric locomotive into operation, what I'm saying is it is exempt from EPA regulations. So there will be a label of some sort that goes on these locomotives that cites to that regulation. That's what I'm trying to point out.
Okay.
Okay, thank you. So now I think we're going to move on to the questions in the chat. So I'll turn it over to Ziv. Ziv, go ahead.
Yes, Din. We have one question from Vanu Gupta. Vanu was asking, these metrics can be applied to battery electric locomotives in various applications. Can the verification process include mainline battery electric locomotives along the switchers?
So that won't be part of this you know, this development process for approval criteria. It is possible that those could be included in, you know, in a later phase of developing criteria. You know, we're kind of trying to take it in, you know, one step at a time, as far as, you know, starting with switchers, and then possibly expanding with, you know, like a similar framework for different types of equipment. So that could happen at that later point.
And Robin, if I can just piggyback on that, I think Anna put in the chat the link to our webpage where we have this presentation. And we also have a 2-page Q&A document if people haven't had a chance to look at that, where we address that and some other questions that people might have. So definitely take a look at that. Go to that webpage and see sort of some of the supplemental materials that we have.
Do we have any more questions at this time for this this topic?
Ziv, are there any more questions in the chat?
No more questions in the chat.
Okay, thank you. So now I'm gonna go on to the questions from callers. I only see 2 callers, so I'll start off with the caller with the number starting, your phone number starting with 6. I will enable your audio. If you do have a question, then please unmute yourself and begin your question. So the phone number starting with the 6. Okay, I guess there isn't a question from that caller. The second caller I have is the phone number starts with a 5. I will enable your audio, and if you do have a question, please unmute yourself and begin talking. Go ahead, caller with the phone number starting with 5, if you do have a question. I think you're unmuted, but. Okay, if you're talking, we can't hear you right now, so we'll try it again, maybe at the end. Okay, thank you. Okay, I see 2 more raised hands, so we'll go through them. The first person I have is Peter Orowski. I will enable your audio, Peter, and you can begin talking.
Yeah, I was wondering if you could reiterate your position on this would apply to switcher locomotives, but not road locomotives. For example, CARB had a testing program with BNSF that ran a locomotive from Barstow to Stockton and back. And I guess I can see the difference between a switcher and a road unit from a combustion point of view, but it's a little less clear when you're looking at just battery electrics. I mean, predominantly the size of the battery pack, I guess. So could you explain why you're limiting it to just switchers?
So I think Joe kind of went over this briefly, but switchers, there have been a few recent requests for funding, and it's been a challenge in this specific category of not having this type of approval criteria and having to evaluate on a case by case basis. Another thing is that we're at the very beginning of this development process, and right now it is kind of the vision to expand it to other categories of equipment. But we're focusing on switchers just to try to take a small chunk in a sector that we think needs this first. So
would the 8 megawatt Joule, for example, which I've seen on news releases, would that be a switcher?
Mike or Joe, do you want to weigh in on that?
Somebody from Progress Rail, maybe you can weigh in.
Yeah.
Is that a switcher?
If you go to our Q&A document, I think that sort of describes what we're thinking of as switchers. If you're talking, and I'm not aware of this particular switcher, is it a military industrial switcher?
No.
If you could describe it a little bit more, you could reach out to us afterwards and we can sort of talk about what. I think if it's something that's going, it's moving moving things around or moving cars around the rail yard, and it's of the horsepower and size that of through the federal definition of a switcher, then yes, it's a switcher. I apologize. I'm not aware of the particular demo project that you're referring to, and we can talk offline if you want to sort of get into that detail. But take a look at our Q&A document, and we have sort of yeah.
Thanks.
Thank you very much.
Okay, the next person with raised hand is Michael Eden. I will enable your audio, Michael, and you can begin your question.
Okay, and I apologize for going back. I missed the opportunity to ask, but on the overview of concept slide, much closer to the beginning, I believe it's slide 4, there's a line item that states zero emission technology is currently market ready. And with respect to the topic at hand, which is zero emission locomotives, what exactly do you mean by market ready? Are you referring to the technologies at the high level, or are you talking about packaging of the technologies in the form of locomotives? It's a little confusing.
Well, we're aware of, there's locomotives. We mentioned that the Carl Moyer program has funded several zero emission switchers. There's not a definition of market ready. As you know, it's a complicated topic, and it might differ among different types of vehicles and equipment. But there are, we do know that there's zero emission switchers that have gone through demonstration program or programs with CARB. There's zero emission switchers that have gotten funded through Carl Moyer program, which is for commercialized equipment, and they've made the case on a case-by-case basis that these are market ready. These are not demo programs, or these are not demo switchers. There's stakeholders that are making zero emission switchers that are lobbying our folks with the core program funding to be eligible for that program, and that's a program that only funds market ready products. And I think we agree that these are, some of these switchers have gone past the demonstration phase, and they're ready to be deployed, in rail yards. And so we don't have a definition of, written definition of market ready, but part of it is that it meets the needs of the switcher, the rail yard, and that it's demonstrated that it can perform over a typical duty cycle. And so I think part of what we're trying to do with this effort is to come up with performance metrics that would help a fleet, determine that this switcher is market ready and would meet the needs, would meet their needs. So this is an age-old age-old discussion of, hey, what's demo and what should go through demo funding, what's market ready and should go to these other market ready programs. And I think we feel pretty comfortable that there are zero emission switchers out there that are more sort of in the, starting to poke their head under the tent of market ready, and we want to have metrics out there for helping people make that determination.
Okay, in the interest of time, I'm going to have one last question from somebody who raised their hand, then we'll move on to the next portion of the presentation. Scott Myers, I will enable your audio, and please ask your question.
I didn't raise my hand, I'm sorry. Apologize.
Oh, okay, all right. Okay, so at this point, I think we are going to move on to the next portion. So Robin, go ahead.
Okay, thank you, Din. Thank you to everybody who had comments and questions. So now we'll go through a few other types of possible approval criteria, and then we'll open up the discussion once more for these categories. So first, we may ask manufacturers to explain what kind of information is visible to or accessible to a switcher locomotive operator. And the approval criteria could specify what is expected to be accessible. So this would likely include battery state of charge, information about any detected malfunctions, and could also include any other in-use performance information that, that would be beneficial to operators. The next category is warranty and recall criteria. In this development process, we may evaluate a range of options for a minimum required warranty. It could be stated as a defined number of years, miles, hours of use, or energy usage. There could be separate criteria related to battery packs, other components or systems, or the switcher as a whole. There could be a requirement to report warranty claims, which could include a minimum number of claims, either as a % of units sold or a defined number of units that would be reached before reporting is required. However, this may depend on expected sales volumes, which may not yet be enough to justify a minimum threshold at this point. CARB's goal is for warranty requirements to be as comprehensive as possible without deterring early market growth. Another area of discussion is recall criteria and whether these should be defined at this stage, and if so, how. And this is an area, of course, that we're looking for your feedback in. Warranty claims reporting and recall requirements in particular are typically elements for more traditional on and off-road equipment categories with high volumes. And in other categories, they're needed to ensure product failures are identified and addressed. And so our question would be, to what degree are these applicable to switcher locomotive manufacturing and maintenance? Finally, durability information and data reporting requirements are also being considered as part of these approval criteria. There could be a requirement to provide in-use telematics data, either for a defined number of initial units sold or for a defined number of years or hours of operation at specific time intervals, for example, quarterly, or according to another type of threshold, such as energy usage. The intent is that this be data that is already available and generated, utilizing existing telematics or data collection capabilities, and not to introduce a burden of capturing and reporting data that isn't readily accessible. If included, these requirements would allow manufacturers and CARB to better understand in-use performance of systems over time. And in analyzing the data collected, we would have more information to facilitate our ongoing development and refinement of approval criteria. And so with that, we can open up a discussion on these topics that we just went over, as well as if there are any other types of criteria or categories of criteria that we might not have covered. And so as we did, as we tried to for the previous, the discussion of performance metrics, let's try to limit the scope of this conversation to that topic. And then we're going to have another, kind of open question session at the end. And with that, I'll hand it over once more to Din.
Thanks, Robin. Okay, so if you have a question, please raise your hands. Okay, at this time, I don't see any raised hands, so I think I'll turn it over to Ziv in the chat questions. Oh, wait. Okay, there is one, sorry. Scott Myers, I will enable your audio and you may begin asking your question.
Not what I'm doing, but I didn't raise my hand, I'm sorry.
Okay. Okay, so I don't see any other raised hands. So once again, let's go over to Ziv with the questions in the chat.
We have one question from Colby Morrow. It's actually related to the previous section. Colby was asking, he had a similar question as Mr. Eden. Could CARB provide a list of market-ready products?
I think that's kind of what we're here for today, is to develop a process that we could better specify. I mean, we could identify the locomotives that have been funded through Moyer on a case-by-case basis, or that have gone through demonstration programs, but I don't, making an official determination that those are market ready, I don't know what that would end up being used for. And I think the more useful, the more useful sort of process would be to sort of develop these criteria and then have that be our process for identifying market ready products. And so I hope that you guys will work with us to sort of figure out what are the metrics and warranty requirements and other things that sort of put together sort of indicate, if a locomotive were to provide all that information and commit to the warranty and other requirements that we might end up with, is that sort of a reasonable criteria for identifying a market ready switcher? So I hope that you guys, there seems to be a lot of interest in sort of, is something, has it crossed through the hoop of now being market ready? And I hope that this will be a useful process for us to make those determinations.
Ziv, are there any other questions in the chat or?
Yes, Steve Fritz just asked in the Q&A, information to the operator and reported to CARB and the public should include the carbon intensity of the electricity used to charge the battery electric locomotive.
All right, thanks for that input.
Okay, I think that's all the questions in the chat. Now, once again, we're going to go to the questions from callers. So actually, since there's only 2 callers, I'm going to allow both of you to ask your question. I'll enable your audio, and if you do have a question, please unmute yourself and begin your question. Okay, I'm thinking that there's no questions from callers. So at this time, Ziv, is there another question in the chat? I don't see any other raised hands.
Yeah, so actually Colby Morrow asked again in the Q&A, having a list of which projects have been funded with Moya would be helpful to those who are working with CEC on demonstration projects.
Okay. Yeah, I think that's publicly available. We can put you in contact with our Moyer folks. I hope I haven't misspoken for the Moyer team.
Okay, at this time, I don't see any other raised hands. And if there's no more questions in the chat, I think, Robin, we can move on to the next section of your presentation.
Okay, thank you. All right, so the next thing we're going to go over is next steps. So we're still going to have another opportunity to ask any more questions or provide any more comments at the end. But first, we're going to talk about the next steps of this development process and go over our intended timeline. So our goal right now is to have this guidance document available later this summer. Between now and June, CARB staff will continue to collaborate with stakeholders. We've already started to have meetings with some of you. We definitely expect to have more conversations and more meetings, and for the overall conversations on this topic to be ongoing. In the June to July timeframe, we expect to have a draft guidance document available for members of this work group to review and for you to be able to provide your comments. For anyone who registered for this meeting or anybody that emails me or has emailed me expressing interest in this topic, we would send you the draft for you to comment on. And then at that point, we'll gather and incorporate the feedback that we get. And then right now we're anticipating that around the August timeframe, the final guidance document will be published on the CARB website. And finally here, we've provided the contact information for the CARB staff that are leading the development of approval criteria for switchers. If you have additional questions or comments after today's meeting, or if you're interested in providing more input and feedback to this development effort, we definitely encourage you to reach out. That's one of the primary reasons that we're here today. And so I'm the lead staff for this effort, so you can contact me directly. And we also have Mike Jaxola, who is the technical advisor for this topic within the freight approval section. And then also Joe Calavita, who is the manager of the freight approval section. Please note that on our website, you can find this presentation as well as other documents and information related to this topic, including the Q&A document that Joe had mentioned that that we created to, to hopefully answer some of what we think will be the more common questions on this topic. So that is currently there for you to look at. This website link that's provided here was also included in the original notification for this work group meeting, as well as if you registered prior to about, I think, Tuesday, you were on an email that I sent to all of the registrants to this work group yesterday that includes that link where you can find all of those documents and also the presentation today. And so now that's all that we have here. So let's open up once more for any last comments and questions. And again, I want to point out, that we, in addition to anything you might, have for us here as far as comments and questions go, we encourage you reaching out directly. And, we definitely are seeking your feedback and your comments. So I'll hand it back over to Din once more.
Thanks, Robin. So once again, we'll start with the questions from those who raised their hands, and then chat, and finally to the phone. Okay, so with I have Richard Conti. I will allow you, enable your audio. You may begin your question.
Again, Richard Conti, California Steel Industries. And I've heard the term switcher used kind of just openly here. And one of our concerns, and I'm sure there's many other companies like ours, that our infrastructure is set up for a yard switcher back in the day, which is a shorter platform than a road switcher. And I know many of the yards, the BN and the UPs, they've gotten rid of their yard switchers and they use their larger platform switchers for doing that work. We're limited by our rail infrastructure in the radiuses of our tracks. And I only bring that up because I'm sure there's somebody else out there in the world. And early on, when we were doing research trying to find cleaner locomotives, many of the providers were telling us that their road switchers would work fine in our infrastructure, and that's not the case. So I just want to make you guys fully aware, and you probably are, that a yard switcher from the old days is totally different than a road switcher. That's it. Thank you.
Thanks for that comment. It's noted. Thank you.
Okay. Is there any other questions from people who want to raise their hands? I don't see any right now. So I think for now we'll move over to the questions in the chat. Ziv, go ahead.
There are no new questions in the chat and Q&A screens.
Okay, thank you. And now I apologize. For those on the phone, I didn't realize the instruction was once I enable your audio, you need to press *6 to unmute yourself to begin your question. So I'm going to unmute both of the callers, and then you can press *6 to begin your question, if you have any.
So Dan, this is George Score. I don't have a question. I'm not sure why it's indicating I have a question.
Oh, no. I can't see whether you have a question or not. I'm just giving the opportunity to the callers. So.
Oh, I understand.
Yeah.
No, I have no questions.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, George. Okay. I guess there's no questions from the callers. Okay, so Robin, yeah, unless we see anybody else raise their hands. In the meantime, if there's no more questions, I can see.
Okay, yeah, last call for questions, at least at this meeting. So that was the end of our presentation for today. So if that's it, if that's it as far as any comments and questions that anybody has at this time, I think we're going to end here. But again, I want to reiterate that we encourage your involvement in this process, and so please feel free to reach out directly. And unless anybody has any further comments, I think that's it for today. So thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thanks. Bye.